Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Rebel Broadcast. This is the ghetto edition because I'm not even recording with Audacity on my computer, because if you saw my post on Twitter like 3 weeks ago probably, when I actually am recording this as opposed to when it's coming out, my computer is doing updates. I think it's upgrading to Windows 10 Creators Edition or whatever the fuck it is. It's going to take forever, so I'm just recording on my microphone, and let's hope this doesn't suck. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about labels. Labeling yourself, and if that's valuable. And I forgot, because I don't have my computer, that I didn't ask Twitter to ask questions about this. I'm going to do that right now. Hello. I am recording the new Rebel Broadcast on my shitty mic. Actually, this mic isn't that shitty. It's just not connected to the computer, so I get worried that things are going to happen because I can't monitor it while I'm doing anything. The topic is the value. That's a spelling error. The value. Will I edit this part out in the actual podcast? Probably not. I'm lazy, but I should. For the record, know that I know that I should have edited this out, but I'm not going to. The value of personal labels. The value of labeling yourself. Feel free to ask questions. That tweet was exactly 100 and whatever characters, 140 characters. Yeah, I'm a genius wordsmith. Okay, so we'll get to the Q&A later, but we're going to talk about the value of personal labels. Now, what do I mean by the value of personal labels, and personal labels in general? As creative people, or at least this is what I do, I tend to ascribe a label. I think humans, we seem to like labels a lot, and I think it's just because it's good at categorizing things. You can kind of slot things into where they go, and it simplifies our perceptions, and it simplifies just daily life. If instead of like being presented with this chaotic mess of like an infinite kind of sprawling universe, and just like even in our daily lives we have like lots of like complexity, if we can kind of like ascribe categories to things and simplify all of the mess that's around us into things that are more easily understandable, it makes our lives simpler, and it makes it easier on our brains, and our brains are all about making things simpler. So we categorize tons of stuff. For good and for bad. And one of the things that we categorize is ourselves. We categorize ourselves into labels and things. A lot of the times it's by occupation. I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, I'm an engineer, I'm a business person, I'm an artist, I'm a graphic designer, I'm whatever. We categorize ourselves into our interests and, like social groups and social cliques and things like that. Specifically for the topic of this podcast, I was focusing on creative people and how they label themselves in the creative communities. Is my computer seriously already done? It said it was going to take forever. It's going to restart multiple times. Oh no, it's doing a disk check. Fuck that. It's going to take forever. Creative people, we don't just stop at artists. Like an engineer or a science, not even a science is not a great example. But I guess this can extend as far as you want, depending on how specific you get. But like there are labels and sublabels and sublabels of sublabels to make things more specific, which almost seems to kind of defeat the purpose of labels by simplifying things, by making it more complicated. But whatever. I guess an incredibly narrow field of labels is still more simple than like a complete mess of just everything. But artists and creative people, we're not just creatives, we're not just artists. I mean, we tend to include ourselves in that halo group, but I don't think there are very few people who just say I'm an artist and mean that in and of itself, unless you're just like, like a fine artist. I think like there's a little bit of pride in calling yourself an artist like that. But if you're a graphic designer, you're a graphic designer. You're an artist, but you're a graphic designer. If you're an illustrator, you're an illustrator, not just an artist. If you're an animator, so you can narrow down. Then from animation, you can go from like 2D animation to 3D animation to concept animation to, flash animation, puppet animation, stop motion animation. Like there's labels like that. And I wonder if pigeonholing ourselves into specific labels does harm as well as good. I think it does some good in terms of like it's good for communication, right? Like if I tell you that I'm an author or whatever, right? You get a much more concrete idea of what I mean in one word as opposed to me saying I'm a creative person. That can mean a cornucopia of different things. So if I identify mostly as an author, I can just tell you I'm an author and you understand pretty clearly what I do. Like there's more things than that. Like I could say I'm a fiction author. You get better idea of what I write, or a fantasy author. So you can keep narrowing it down. But in terms of like labels, that's a good way of just shorthand understanding of what we are and what we're about. But I feel like there might be a negative to that as well. I think these descriptors become more than just a language convenience. They become a sense of our own identity. And I think by doing that, something bad can happen. I think we might identify with it so much that we become rigid in our labels. So if an author wants to paint, I think there's sometimes for some people can be a bit of a struggle there, personally and socially, right? Because you identify as an author. If you've been an author for like 10, 15, 20 years or whatever, like that's who you are, that's what you do, that's your bread and butter. If you all of a sudden get this kind of like weird flight of fancy, like I want to start painting, or I want to go into business or anything, right? All of a sudden you're pushing against your label and trying to go outside of that box and do something else. And I think the longer that you stay within a label and kind of form your identity internally around it, I think the harder it becomes to break away from that. And there's some resistance because you feel like you've defined your box. This is what you are, and you need to stay inside of this box. I guess probably there's like some sort of like maybe like psychological protection, like it's done for your own safety. Like this is where you're strongest. This is what you're good at. This is what you do, and that identity is it feels safe. And so by moving out of that, you start to worry about what the consequences of that could be, presumably negative consequences, even if the consequences could be positive as well. Our brain is definitely more wired towards risk aversion, just because like the brain has developed to make sure we don't get eaten and shit, as opposed to like actualizing ourselves to our highest intellectual potential, unfortunately. So I think internally we have this like feedback, this pushback, blowback, if you want, from our minds when we try and go outside our labels once we become entrenched to them. And then the same thing happens socially, right? Michael Jordan, basketball player, really good basketball player, wanted to do baseball. What the fuck are you doing, man? You're a basketball player. You can't play baseball, right? And the fact of the matter that he wasn't very good at it, I think is irrelevant to the conversation, because why shouldn't he go play baseball if he wants to? Like, it's his life. He can do whatever he wants. And the fact that there was this like stigma against it, and it happens not just for like, you know, famous athletes or anything. It happens to anybody. Like if you want to make a career change, people are just like, what? Like that's what you do. Even if you like make a hobby change, it's like, like that's what you do. And socially, because it's easier for us to comprehend people and what they're about by giving them a label and cutting it off at that. There's also social blowback when you try and make, you know, a left turn somewhere and explore a new avenue. Which I think is disappointing, because I think it cuts off a lot of possibilities that we might otherwise explore. Like if we weren't so attached to our own labels and we were a bit more loose, or even if we stepped back and we decided, you know what, I'm going to not super hone in on a specific label and live in it. I'm just going to kind of be more general in what I am. Like I know loosely the kind of person I am, but I'm going to allow myself some wiggle room to kind of like sift in between all those sub-labels in this category and just kind of do my thing. I think that helps for personal exploration. The problem I would assume from that is because, you know, a lot of these labels that we ascribe to our lives also kind of like have financial implications. Like if you're a business person, like you make your money that way in business. So if you decide to go on a flight of fancy and you want to start like performing on Broadway or do plays or something, like if you take a hard left that way, like you're throwing your financial future in jeopardy and your entire life could come crumbling down if this doesn't work out. And I think that's where a lot of the social blowback comes from, because these decisions to kind of explore new avenues and change who we are and kind of move out of our boxes and try new things can be a huge financial risk if we do them too extreme. So why am I talking about this? Like, I've talked about this kind of on a meta context. Let's bring it back to something more personal. I have been a slave to my labels forever. As far back as I can remember, when I started doing creative stuff, I always knew I was a creative person. Like, I got that. I was not good at school, ever. That's not true. I guess back in, like, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade elementary school, pretty good at school. Math was always difficult. Times tables and shit were really hard. I was never a math guy, and I probably never will be, which is a shame because I find math fascinating, but completely baffling at the same time. I'm kind of in awe of it. It's like it's something. It seems like beyond my ability to really comprehend, but at the same time, I understand that math is like integral to basically everything I like. So I respect and love the power of math, but it's just something that I've never been able to comprehend, and the amount of time it would take me to sit down and really understand the subject almost seems not worth the effort put in, because what would I really do with it? But I love math. But I'm getting off track. Is that I was never good at school. Art was really the only thing that I ever really resonated with. Creativity in general, whether it's like creative writing, drawing, things like that. Just like the creative fields are things that I've always been more kind of attuned to, as it were. And I've always appreciated art more than anything else. Like, I loved cartoons more than, like, live action. Not that live action isn't art, but, like, there's a more direct art in animation. At least for, like, a little kid to understand, like, it's easier for a kid to look at a cartoon to think art than it is to, understand the nuances of, like, lighting and directing and, the filmmaking techniques that kind of are a bit more undetectable to the untrained eye. So I was always into art and stuff, and that's what I started doing as a kid. And I've always been a slave to a label, because once I've decided on a label, I kind of not poo-poo everything else, but I block out everything else, because, like, this is what I'm going to be doing. This is me. And I go directly from picking a label to identifying with it. A lot of people, I think, kind of fall into that slowly as time goes on. I just do it, like, consciously and immediately. So the first thing I ever decided to do creatively when I was a little kid was I was going to be a game designer, because I loved video games. I, like, stopped doing my homework for, like, 2 years in middle school to just play video games. I got a PlayStation 2, I got Devil May Cry, and that was all I did. I would lie to my parents constantly and say I didn't have any homework so I could play Devil May Cry all day, and they got really, like, scared of how addicted I got, and they would, like, limit my game time, and I'd find ways to sneak around it, and I'd bring my Game Boy upstairs, and I'd, like, I didn't have the money to buy a worm light, so I'd just, like, take my night light in my room, and then I'd, like, hang halfway out of bed upside down and, like, angled the Game Boy so it would catch the light of the nightlight and play all night and play Pokemon and play Metroid Fusion and Super Mario World and Sonic Advance and shit like that. I just loved games as a child. I mean, I still do. I'm not gonna lie that I still love games a lot. I think reflecting back on my addiction as a child horrifies me because I'd probably be so much further along in my creative pursuits if I just, like, put the damn controller down and picked up a fucking pencil. But at the same time, all that exposure to video games has definitely formed my creative direction now, and I do like my ideas and stuff for the most part. Like, I'm not ashamed of the kind of creativity that I make. Okay, I kind of am, but it's hard to describe. I'm not... It formed who I am, and I'm okay with it. So I wouldn't change it, because who knows what kind of person I would have become if I didn't play video games religiously, is what I'm trying to say. So, played video games constantly. So when I finally decided, like, shit, I should, like, do something with my life other than just playing games, it's like making games was clearly the obvious first answer. Because I wasn't even watching movies and stuff a lot right then, or TV. It was all video games all the time. So, like, in terms of, like, creativity for me began and ended with video games, because, like, I didn't experience anything else that much at that point. So I wanted to be a game designer, and I got a book on programming, and lamau, that made no sense to me, especially as, like, a middle school kid. And that kind of ended my love affair with wanting to be a video game dude. But for the small window of time, I didn't think about doing anything else but making video games, and everything else but making video games seemed retarded to me. And like, I'm going to make games. That's who I am. It's what I do. I'm going to stay in my lane. When that kind of fell apart, I moved into animation because this was the beginning of high school, and there was a class. I don't remember what it's called, but it was like a media communication sort of class, and they had Flash, and you could learn how to animate. And this was back during the time when like Albino Black Sheep and new E-Bombs World and Newgrounds were really big. So there was like all those stick figure animations like Xiao Xiao and animator versus animation were really big. And so like super big into like those like stick figure fight animations and stuff. And I was like, I'm going to be an animator because I like cartoons and stuff, and I like all the fight stuff in video games. So like that's what I'll do because that doesn't have the programming. I'm fine. So I did that for a while, and I never really clicked with it. Probably because I didn't really have a good teacher. I still feel like I probably could have done animation if I had better direction. But the guy who taught the media communications class, he was like, his primary class was shop. He just like knew this on the side, and he wasn't really an artist per se. He just kind of dabbled in a little bit of everything. He's very much kind of like a jack of all trades sort of dude. Super cool guy. Don't get the wrong idea. Mr. Fisher was the shit. He was the coolest dude ever. Best teacher I ever had. Super chill. Didn't know a lot about animation other than the basics, but kudos on him for actually introducing the school to the topic because nobody else fucking did. So he was great. But I never really got the foundation on animation that I really needed, and this was like still like when internet was like baby land, so I couldn't just go to YouTube and Google animation tutorials. It was just like not really a thing. The information was very sparse, so that kind of fizzled out too. And then I moved into comics, and comics lasted almost a decade. And during that time, I never really explored anything else, and everything else that wasn't working on comics was a waste of time. And I just identified so strongly as a comic artist, even though I'd made like little comic strips, but never like actually sat down and made a full comic. I was always trying, but I could never get there for reasons that even to this day I still don't understand. That's my biggest problem, is actually like getting stuff done, which is a whole other topic for another podcast. But from, I want to say 2005 to 2015. Yeah, so 10 years on the dot, pretty much. I did nothing but, like, assume I was going to make comic books, and that's all I focused on. That was it. Nothing else. Again, I got trapped in the label. There were so many other options and opportunities of things that I could do and explore that could have affected me positively, but I never really explored them. You know, like, even during college, there was a bunch of these things that, like stop motion animation and 3D animation a little bit. I dabbled in 3D animation a little bit in college, but it was always for the specific purpose of appropriating for doing comics. But everything was just focused through that lens, and I never allowed myself to be like exploring other options, even though I was in school for graphic design, which was dumb because like I was going to school to become a graphic designer, but I never really assumed I'd ever get a job doing graphic design. I was always just like, I'm just going to be a comic artist. I'm just here because like I have to be, because my parents are going to kick me out if I didn't go to school. So always a slave to the label. Then I started writing just on a whim back when I was doing videos and stuff. And then I kind of started identifying as an author, and then it's gone back and forth for the last couple of years between author and comic artist. Now I'm trying to do 3D. My point, my long-winded, insanely ridiculous point, is that I am at the point now where I'm sick of being a slave to my personal labels. I want to take a step back and just like, I'm someone who makes stuff. I don't know what it's going to be. I have tried and tried and tried and tried and tried for over half my life now to start on a path and continue to follow it and make something amazing. And I've not really been able to do it. And it's not because I'm not motivated. It's not because I don't have the passion. It's that an interesting quote I'd read a while ago was that it's not about chasing the passion, it's about chasing excitement. And they're not really the same thing, because you can be passionate about something, but if it doesn't excite you, you're not going to have the energy. And I've been passionate about all these things, but the excitement wanes. Why does the excitement wane? I don't know. But a lot of the big things that I've always been focusing on with all these labels have been really long game projects, like 5 years, 10 years to do. And I think that's really been my downfall, is that instead of just doing small things that I can finish and maybe get that label out of my system before moving on to the next one, because that seems to be what I do, I kind of like languish in it. And because it becomes such a strong self-identifier, the fact that I'm failing at it feels like I'm failing as a human being. Whereas maybe it's just time to move on to something else. Like maybe I'm never going to be a guy who just sits and does one thing. And I've kind of romanticized that in my mind because of this history of labels, is that, you know, you slave away at one thing and you do one thing really well. And like culturally and societally, that's important too, because like we live in a specialized culture where you get a career and you fucking wreck at that one career and make a lot of money, and that's like the path that you're supposed to take. You can't really jump around from thing to thing. There's no set path for that. You got to kind of just figure it out. But I feel like I'm kind of slowly realizing that's what I've always been, and that the fact that I've like been trying to corral myself into this one little box and focus on that, on these big projects, and commit to it, is something that has hurt me personally and creatively. So right now, like I've said on the last Rebel broadcast, I'm doing 3D. And I kind of was starting to go down the fucking rabbit hole of like, oh, I'm gonna circle around back to my roots. I'm gonna be a game designer. I'm gonna learn Unity and learn some basic coding, and I'm gonna make games, because like it's a bunch of people. Because like I got into low poly 3D because I've always been into low poly 3D. I love that aesthetic. Again, PS2 junkie forever. And everybody who's doing low poly now is doing game design. Like, there's nobody just doing low poly just for, you know, like animation purposes or anything other than game design. Game design is really the only reason people do low poly, for the most part. There's guys like the Regressor who are exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, it's for game design. And I kind of just got sucked into the idea of like, maybe I should be doing game design. Maybe this entire 10-year journey was all a weird roundabout way of getting right back to where we started, and I should be making games. And I started to, again, encase myself in the label of game designer, but I've caught myself. I'm like, wait a minute, I've done this for a decade and it never fucking works. So instead of being like, I'm a game designer, why don't I just say I'm a creative person? You know, I'm not gonna like go out there into the chaos of the world and say that I'm just a human being and I have no defining characteristics beyond that. I mean, because there's just so much at that point. Like, what the fuck do you do? I feel like I just get overwhelmed. But like, I have this like big macro realm of creativity, and within this smaller segmented sphere, there's stuff that I can move around in and just do. I can go a little bit here, go a little bit there, and that's not good for my career, because I don't fucking have a career and I probably never will. It's not good for like building any skills, but it's good for my mental health, at least right now, of just kind of like bouncing around and doing stuff and just doing small little micro projects and getting things done and building a portfolio of like finished stuff. And maybe something will slowly kind of materialize out of that. Maybe I will end up doing game design. Maybe I will go back to comics. Maybe I will do animation. I don't fucking know right now. Like, does it really matter? Does it matter that I don't know? I guess if I wanted to build my platform, it would matter. And like, I should be deciding something, because I think it's way more difficult to be scattershot like this and build a presence and build a brand. But like, business and financial reasons aside, I have no reason to do it. I mean, I guess that is like the most important reason to do something, is to fucking live your life. But I don't know, living my life miserable seems like not the right call. So the moral of the story is, I don't know what the fuck I am and what the fuck I'm doing. I just know that I'm a creative person, and whatever the fuck that means is probably going to change every couple weeks, like it always has, and assumedly always will. And that's not great for me, but I just gotta kind of roll with it for now instead of fighting it and see what happens. I guess this is an extension of Embracing Surrender from last month. But I don't know. I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to dive into game stuff. Don't quote me on it, because again, my whims change constantly. But it is kind of interesting to be in a position right now to go back into game design and tackle it. Because back in the day, back in like 2004, like you didn't have stuff like Game Maker, and you didn't have Playmaker with Unity to like do games without coding. Now I don't really need to code. I mean, I'd love to like get into coding eventually, but for now, like to just kind of dick around and like, oh, I can hit the button and make my character that I modeled and textured move. Like that's kind of cool in and of itself. It doesn't really have any practical application, and you're not going to get super famous or internet famous making a character move around, with a couple simple scripts. But I would have fun doing that, so maybe like that's the important part. So I think I'm going to stop here. I have no idea if anyone even sent questions, but we're gonna find out right now. Well, it doesn't look like there are any questions. I think it's probably because not many people on Twitter follow Rebel Pixels. They're mostly there for PCP stuff. So I will probably edit this part out because, wow, embarrassing. So next time I'll be sure to ask questions on YouTube, which I would have done. I usually, last month, I fucking uploaded a video saying to ask questions, and that's where I got the majority of my questions. But of fucking course, my computer's still trying to update this entire time, so fuck. I was kind of shit out of luck this time. So there's no questions. Question yourself. Leave a comment on this upload asking a question, and maybe I'll answer it if I fucking feel like it. So until next time, I'm Tom Mob, or this is Rebel Pixels, reminding you guys, it might be indie, but that doesn't mean we're alone. I'll catch you for another broadcast next month.